Hello students, this is Dr. Rook and I wanted to spend some time looking at how you can input your students' post-test scores into Excel so that you can analyze their performance. Now I said post-test because you are only required to really analyze the post-test scores in depth. However, it is a big advantage to look at the pre-test scores as well. So my suggestion is at a minimum to have the pre-test mean within your Excel spreadsheet as well as the post-test means for the students as well. So you can look at overall progress. If you would like to, as you're looking on this screen, you can then also look at question by question scores for each of the students' performance on the post-test so that you can look at overall performance through the whole learning sequence. Now, Dr. McVeigh and Professor Reed are going to email you this same exact assessment analysis template in Excel. You're going to receive exactly what you are seeing on my screen so that you can manipulate it to best reflect your post-test. I have two tabs at the bottom. This tab simply looks at post-test performance. In addition, you have one column that just has the pre-test means for all of the students. So pre-test means, post-test means, and then I go question by question with how the students performed just on the post-test. This will give me a lot of information to talk about in my commentary regarding student performance. At the bottom of each column, an average is calculated, and this is done so with formulas. So even if, let's say, you graded these 1 point each, I graded them 10 points each because I wanted them to sum up to 100, for instance, just change it. Change it from 10 points each to 1 point, come here, change it to 1, everything will change, no big deal since everything is based on formulas. In addition, this graph will change if you change any of these column scores. What happens if you have more than 10 questions? Again, no big deal. You just add a column. How do you add a column? You just click on it, you right click, and you click insert, and then you have an option to insert a column. What's going to happen if you start inserting, you're probably going to need to reformat some of this. I have all these pretty borders. You can mess around with formatting by going to Format Cells, going to border, and here's where you mess around with all your borders. You click OK. It's going to take you a little bit of time if you haven't had some experience with Excel figuring out the formatting, but since you're all working at home now, I think this will be a great learning opportunity for you. You notice I have 3 student scores highlighted in yellow. Those would be my focus students. We want to highlight them because you're going to talk about them in your assessment commentary, specifically under number 1. You're going to be pasting this chart and this graph in number 1, and then you will be discussing the different trends that you see within the charts and cross-referencing your 3 focus students and their work samples and what they provided as evidence for patterns of learning that the post-test particularly revealed to you. This is just one instance of what you can do in Excel and then copy and paste it into your assessment commentary to show an analysis of the student learning gains. This is one. I have another possibility too if you look down at this tab. Now you only need to choose one of these. So this one again really just looked at post-test performance, but we had the pre-test in there so we can see, hey, overall these students really did learn a lot. They went from an average of roughly 11% to an average of 88%, showing overall that the students did very well on all 3 learning targets. And of course, as you're discussing more, you can see that, gosh, learning target 1, they showed, you know, the greatest weakness. If you're looking at the averages, you can see that student 14 and student 17 or student 7 really had a strong understanding of what those elements were, but they're really kind of outliers because, you know, most of the students didn't score that high, and student 4 really struggled. So you're going to use those those focus students as an example to show what types of learning occurred and if your focus students were more on the fringes or if they were indicative of what the average student accomplished. Then you would say how you would change things instruction-wise to help those students better understand those learning targets. Okay, so this is one example. If you did this, there are a couple ways that you could capture this. You could just copy it like this. I would copy this, right click, copy it, and then paste it into my assessment commentary. Same with this chart. I would right click, copy, and paste it into my assessment commentary. If you're having issues when you paste them in there with borders and it's not working out, screenshot each of these and instead paste them in as a JPEG, because then it's easier to manipulate it. Here's a second example. I'm going to click on this one. You're going to notice it's set up differently. This might particularly work for somebody who gave a test in math. Why? Because when you look at this, you notice that each of these three colored columns look at how the students progress from the pretest to the post-test for each of the learning targets. This means that this student was able to design a pre and post-test where each question dealt with just one of the learning targets. I know in several different disciplines, you're going to have a question that might hit two different learning targets, and you're not going to be able to tease these out and make them so separate. So this may not work for you, and maybe the previous tab was a better, more functional presentation of the student's progress on the post-test, since it went question by question. This one does not go question by question. Instead, it just takes the student's average performance on each of the learning targets. So this particular candidate would have averaged questions 1 through 5 because it dealt with learning target 1. Maybe learning target 1, I'm going to use math as an example, was students' ability to solve systems of equations graphically and interpret the meaning of their solutions. And maybe that was just questions 1 through 5, and so we see their pre-test performance versus their post-test performance, and they're just grading this out of 100 points in order to see how they performed on learning target 1. And then on learning target 2, questions 6 through 10, again, they're averaging them out of 100 points, and let's say that this was maybe solving systems of equations using substitutions and interpreting their solutions in a way that demonstrates conceptual understanding. And they again average them out of 100 points, and we're able to see the difference there in terms of their learning gains. And then learning target 3 was questions 11 through 15. Maybe this is solving systems of equations using linear elimination and demonstrating conceptual understanding of what the solutions mean again. And we see that they average these out of 100 so that we could see the learning gains again. Do they have to be out of 100 points? Absolutely not. Let's say that each of those 5 questions were worth 10 points each. They could have been out of 50 points. However you graded it is totally fine. You just need to be able to discuss what it was out of. I love to work with percents because it gives me a common baseline and benchmark. If everything is out of 100%, then I know that 100 means that the students perfectly got it, and we're down to 0, it means they did not. So it's totally up to you how you want to enter your data for this. But this is nice and slick because it looks at each of these learning targets individually, and we're able to see the progress from pre to post test. I also have the overall scores from pre to post. And then again, if you were to change any of these, it would automatically adjust in the class means. If you need to add, let's say you had more than 18 students, all you do is you click these and then you right click and you'll do insert, and again it'll insert rows. You may have to right click though again in order to format some of these with the borders and color and everything. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is explain how you're going to discuss this, because it is not going to be enough in that assessment commentary under number 1C to say students showed a 15% understanding of learning target 1, which dealt with graphical solutions to systems of equations, and 82% of them then demonstrated proficiency with this concept on the post test. They do not just want you to report quantitative information. You have to interpret it in a qualitative manner, and you have to use your focus students as evidence for trends that you saw solve for the whole class. Now in this chart, I do not have highlighted my 3 focus students. I would do that. All you would have to do is select the amount of information that you want, and then you would come up and you would just fill that. Here, we fill that one with yellow, for instance, and do that for your other 2 students as well. But using the math example, let's say we have 14. I'm just going to select 10. In response to, this is going to be in response to 1C, where they are asking you to utilize those the patterns of learning for the whole class and the differences between groups and or individual learners, and they want you to keep using those 3 focus learners to demonstrate trends. What you could do, let's say this is one of your focus learners here. Let's say for number 1, we see that, he demonstrated decent progress overall for learning target 1, which had to deal with the graphical representation of systems of equations and their solution. He achieved a 70% on the post-test. That is 12% lower than the class mean. So he had a deficiency there. You would want to refer back to his work sample, which is going to be your post-test, and maybe you ask him to explain what that point of intersection means, and he just put, it's the answer. Instead of articulating that point of intersection gives me the x and the y that would satisfy both of those equations at the same time. So you would need to do a little bit more instruction on what an ordered pair gives to you when you solve a system of equations. Taking the quantitative outcome and discussing it qualitatively, and then implications from that is what they are looking for in response to 1C. Let's look here on this last one, and I'm going to use this student again. We see that he went from a 0 in learning target 3 to a 90. That 90 is really reflective of the whole class mean, so it shows a common trend. A 90, by certain scales would be considered an A, so that means that you were very efficient in helping the student to understand that learning target. Let's say that that learning target maybe had to deal with translating into equations, to a system of equations, word problems to demonstrate conceptual understanding of what to do with numbers and how they can be modeled into a numeric equation when presented with a word problem. So you could discuss that you did a good job helping the students to conceptually understand how to translate a written model into an equation or set of equations. And that really shows their ability to process the information. Now, you could then discuss how that also translated to some procedural fluency, because maybe they then had to solve those problems as well, and they're still scoring quite high. So that is also another great achievement there. But they're looking for you to translate those numerical scores into whatever qualitative trends your learning targets specifically would identify. And you want to use those 3 different focus students as examples to identify trends, whether they're trends that exist for a small portion of the class or trends that exist for a large portion of the class. And again, you're just going to pick one of these models to employ. So maybe this model fits really well, and so you would then copy this chart and this graph, or maybe you prefer this one and you would copy this chart and this graph. Maybe you hate both of them, which is fine. If you were doing SFA, maybe you had some word power, vocabulary, and then some reading comprehension, and maybe that's exactly how you want to divide this up. Feel free to create your own. Maybe you don't even like that I have this learning target 1 questions, learning target 2, learning target 3. You can delete all of that, right-click it, go ahead, feel free to delete that. Look. Now it just goes by question. That might fit your model better. You can manipulate as you see fit. Know that the graph will manipulate with you. The only thing that you might have to do is do some formatting. And if you're having issues with the formatting, feel free to reach out to Dr. McVeigh and Professor Reed, and they can reach out to me. Also employ YouTube. They'll have a lot of resources for learning how to format. But I hope you found this helpful, and God bless you all as you're working on this. This is going to help you to become such a strong and wonderful reflective practitioner, and you're going to have a beautiful work sample to show to future employers, demonstrating your abilities to assess your own teaching performance.